Absolutely was here a very long time ago when the sanctuary used to point that way. And there was like a baptismal font right about where those little window things are. So a lot has changed, but a lot's still doing the same. A lot's still the same. It's always wonderful to come back and touch base and get reacquainted. Kids are growing up so fast. Our oldest two are are well into their dual enrollment, so they're taking college classes at the local university. And yeah, if there's anything that will make you feel old, it's that. Helping with college homework and not high school homework, that's the thing. But it's always fun, and I'm very proud of them and the work they're doing. The younger two who are only younger by a year and a half. So, but they're doing great as well in their studies, playing violin, and it's just wonderful to see everyone grow up, and I can't tell you how much easier it gets to make road trips when everybody can get in the car of their own volition and bring their suitcase with them. So everything at Cincinnati is going well. It's still very, very busy. It feels like the nights just keep getting fuller. I'm the overnight chaplain at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And so anything that happens after 10 p.m. is kind of what I respond to. And sometimes the cases change, sometimes they get more challenging, but by and large, it's folks, not unlike the Psalm, the 90th Psalm that we just read, kind of suffering in the dark or experiencing crisis late at night. In preparing for the message, I was reminded of a patient who came into us many years ago. I met them right after I got home from a Thanksgiving break, which is when we'll typically come up to Chicago. And a 15-year-old boy had been in a ATV accident, rolled over and had broken some bones and sustained a traumatic brain injury. And he was in the ICU from the end of Thanksgiving to just before Christmas and got to know his family. For me, it's very rare for me to get to know folks over multiple visits. Usually I'm there for a short time of crisis or a long time of crisis. But I got to know his family. He was mostly unconscious as he was healing, and got to listen to some of their stories about him, got to listen to them talk about the accident, which for a lot of folks is actually hard to do, to remember what happened and to talk through it with someone new or to tell the story again and worry if they're going to traumatize the person listening or if they'll have space to say what they're really wondering about or worrying. So being able to talk through that is a tremendous gift. So we got to know each other over time. They were Christians, and we prayed a couple nights a week until they were discharged from the ICU to the rehab unit. They were worried that he might be different, that the brain injury might kind of change the energetic, happy young guy they knew. They were worried that he wouldn't be able to play sports in college the way he had wanted to. He was a gifted baseball player, and they were worried about him a lot. But it was very good to see him start to get better, start to move, and get to rehab. And that's not something that I get to see very much. So that was a gift for me, that I recognized that I often don't get to see someone come in, get support, and see where they end up. I'm just there for that quick snapshot. On a recent night, got called up to the ICU for a code, and muscled in, because usually there's about 30 medical staff in the room lining up to do compressions, pulling medicine, and I often forget that I'm something of a giant there. So often overnight, I don't know if just overnight attracts not tall folks, but generally I'm the tallest person in the hospital overnight. And so I made my way to the bedside and then found where the parents were in an alcove and was with them and asked them how things were going. Invited, our term in chaplaincy is inviting storytelling. So that's making it safe, inviting somebody to say, hey, what happened? Tell me about your kiddo. Tell me about the accident. And as we processed what was going on, found out that they were Christians and they wanted prayer. And so we prayed, and one of the nurses who was nearby, he prayed with us too. And throughout the night, the nurse would check back in as we waited to hear results from all the interventions that the medical team was doing. The nurse made sure we had plenty of juice and that the family was well supported. The code ended up going well. The patient started to recover. All the excess people left the room, and I kept talking to the family and listening for ways to support them, and the nurse kept coming in and connecting with them as well and making sure they had everything they needed. So we left the room together, and the nurse, Michael, turned to me and he said, so how long have you been doing this? I said, I've been here 11 years. And it's not uncommon for new nurses to ask me how long I've been there, because they want to know when they're going to get used to being a vampire and just being awake at night and never seeing the sun again. And I said, about 11 years. It's like, yeah, I thought I recognized your voice. I came in with an ATV accident like 7 years ago, and my parents said that a chaplain came and visited them a couple nights a week and prayed with them and supported them, and that made a big difference for them. And so I wanted to become a nurse to help folks in the same hospital where I was a patient. So that was a rare gift, a very rare gift to find out 7 years later. He didn't go for sports. He went to become a nurse. And now I get to work with him overnight. So not only am I proud of my children, my own children, but also the spiritual children that I've come into contact with, that I've had the opportunity to mentor over time. Always brings a smile to my face when I hear a doctor or a nurse teaching another doctor or nurse something that I taught them. It's not uncommon for, I think, all folks to try to make things easier by speaking in euphemisms. I recently had a baby come in who had RSV and needed to be intubated, and the nurses described the process of intubation. The doctor described it as, we're going to give the baby a little medicine, it's going to make them a little sleepy, and then we're going to put a breathing tube in. And if any of you have ever seen an intubation on TV or in person, you know that they are completely unconscious. The medicine makes them very limp, and for small children, we keep them asleep until it's time to take the tube out. But the doctor kept describing to a Spanish-speaking family that, oh, they're just going to be a little sleepy. And I could hear them. I can speak Spanish, so I understood what they were saying among themselves. Like, this is not how our baby gets sleepy. This is, they're not moving at all. And so I was able to ask the doctor some clarifying questions, like, so when you say a little sleepy, do you mean not moving, completely still, or like drowsy? She's like, not moving, completely still. How long are you going to have the baby this way? Until the tube comes out. And then later the doctor asked, well, do you have any feedback for me? He's like, yes, please speak very directly to people who are going through a time of trauma or crisis, because our ability to pick up on euphemisms, especially if it's from a different culture, is greatly diminished when we're wondering if our loved one's going to live or die. And a couple weeks later, I heard her telling that to one of the residents. That also brought a smile to my face. And it reminded me of some of the passages that came from this week's readings. You had 2 John and 3 John and Jude. John starts both of the epistles in a similar way. He addresses himself as the elder, and he says, the elder, comma, to the lady chosen by God and her children, whom I love in the truth, and not I only, but all who know the truth, because of the truth which lives in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, who will be with us in truth and in love. It has given me great joy to find some of your children walking in the truth, as the Father commanded us. And now, dear lady, I'm not writing to you a new commandment, but one that we have from the beginning. I ask that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk in obedience to his commands. As you have heard from the beginning, his command is that you walk in love. He starts John 3 in a very similar manner. To my dear friend Gaius, who I love in the truth. Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. It gave me great joy when some believers came and testified about your faithfulness and truth, telling how you continue to walk in it. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in truth. Dear friend, you are faithful in what you're doing for the brothers and sisters, even though they are strangers to you. They have told the church about your love. Please send them on their way in a manner that honors God. And in thinking about that, and thinking about coming to a new year, I thought to reflect on what are the commandments that we have from Jesus? What are the things we have known since the beginning? How do we walk in love? And that made me come to this passage here, Matthew chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount, the first real big sermon that Jesus teaches. Starts off, when Jesus saw the crowd, he went up onto a mountainside and he sat down, and his disciples came to him and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." These are things that I come back to very frequently. as I think about Scripture, as I think about faith, as I reflect on what it means to be a Christian. That, for me, it's a very powerful image to be that beacon of light in the midst of darkness, because that's something that I very much strive to be, especially being in literal darkness most of the time. It's something that connects back with what John was writing about being known by their love and their support of one another. In 3 John, it goes on to say that Gaius was doing this work and didn't receive any help from the pagans. And I think for me, one of the really tremendous gifts that I've received is being able to be with folks in crisis and at end of life, and to be able to hear what really matters to people when they're connecting with one another, and what makes a difference, and to be sad with someone. Because at first it doesn't feel like being comforted is enough of a reward for mourning. Right? Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And I think it's important to understand that comfort isn't just being mollified. We're not just kind of cheering you up. We're not handing you the tissues because your crying is making us uncomfortable. Please stop. Or inviting you to think of a happy memory instead. But really sitting with someone in the ashes, kind of like the friends of Job did up until they didn't. And just give a person space to mourn and a space to find that comfort in the presence of the Lord. Recently, had a woman come up from Mississippi. She drove herself 12 hours to Children's Hospital in labor because she had heard that they could do an operation that the local hospitals in Mississippi wouldn't do. Her baby had a genetic disorder and needed some heart surgery right away. And even then, it wasn't looking good. So she started feeling contractions, drove to her local hospital, and they said, well, we can't really do anything. She picked up her daughter, and she had a 20-year-old daughter as well. So this was a surprise baby much later on. And she drove through the night to Cincinnati, gave birth, the baby had surgery, and I got called the next day because Mom wanted a baptism and prayer, and so we talked a bit and found out that we're both Latino and talked about what it was like to be up late at night and how on long road trips, one of the things that we did, it's something I remember from my childhood, we'd arrive, it didn't matter what time we left Chicago, we would go visit my grandmother in Killeen, Texas. And it didn't matter what time we left Chicago. We could leave at 3 in the morning. We could leave at 2 in the afternoon. We always arrived at 2 in the morning. And we wouldn't go to sleep. There would be food ready. We'd sit up and we'd catch up. What happened? How's the family doing? I haven't seen so-and-so in so long. And there was that fellowship, that camaraderie. And that's one of the things that I remember I really love, just connecting again. And she shared she had a similar experience. She really liked that. It's like, yeah, we always arrived in the middle of the night and would just stay up and talk. So Well, a few days later, we talked again, and the surgeons were kind of hemming and hawing, and she had some very hard decisions to make because it didn't look like there was anything more they could do, and there wasn't. And so the night that baby died, she asked me to come up to the room, and I said, well, this is what I normally do. I'll sit with you, I'll check in, then I'll step away and give you some time. And she said, you know what I would really appreciate is if we could just sit by the bed like we just got into town and just talk. And so we talked about family that none of us knew from the other, and just talked like we'd just gotten into town after a long journey. And as we talked, the baby did die. And we transitioned our conversation about to what comes next. But that's the kind of comfort that she needed in that moment, to process things, to make it real, for that baby to have been a part of her life. The baby got to feel what it was like to arrive in the middle of the night after a long journey. And then we said goodbye, and she went back to Mississippi. And I often think of that when I think of the blessed are they who mourn, for they will be comforted. Because it wasn't just a distraction that happened there. There was some deep spiritual work. Because as we talked about family members and what people did and who they were, we talked about God. As we talked about the baptism that she wanted, talked about the other folks who had been baptized in the family and what it meant to them and kind of what a faith journey she had been on. And it was a rough one. And her 20-year-old daughter was there with us as well. And those are the moments where it's not turning weeping into laughter, but it is bringing comfort, letting folks know that they're not alone and that they're cared for and that there's no question that's too scary to ask. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. After what Moses said in Psalm 90, I'm not sure that that's necessarily what the meek want to do. But meekness, I think, is more than just humility. It's vulnerability. It's being willing to engage folks where they are, where each of and being willing to be engaged where we are. I think if we go back to the story of the doctor saying, "Oh, it's just a little sleep." The reason that happens, the reason that kind of update is given is because it creates some clinical distance between the provider and the patient. It allows them to reframe things in their mind in a way that's less intense and doesn't have to necessarily acknowledge in that moment, like, wow, this is some really serious business, and we're giving some very serious medicine to make you sleep, and they're going to look so still until we wake them up again. But being meek, being willing to, we had a doctor for many years, and he has since moved away. His name's Matt, and he was a very meek doctor. He would often send referrals to the ICU. Like, we would get a direct admit from home. We're like, how did you get here? Well, Matt's their neighbor. He went over, saw the kid, called us, and admitted him from home. And this doctor would always be very forthright with his patients and let them know, just speak very lovingly, very gently to them, but also very clearly. Just before he left, there was a long-term patient that he had been taking care of, and the family came in, and this patient was in their 30s, developmentally disabled, and had a lot of lung issues, and there was no more that we could do. And so Matt took Mom by the hand and told her about that. And there were a couple more procedures that they needed to do. They needed to put a chest tube in and needed to put some IVs in. And while Mom was there, just to keep things calm and engaged so that Mom could talk to Matt and I, Matt did all the IV work. He did all the work. Didn't have any nurses. It was just the three of us. And he did all the work himself. And that is a kind of meekness that absolutely changed how Mom processed the grief from that situation, because she knew he was grieving as well. He didn't put up any walls, any pretenses. He got teary-eyed, and that made a huge difference in how they planned the rest of his care, because Mom knew that it was hurting Matt to have to say these things just as much as it was hurting her. Another time when it's very hard to be meek is when there's a lot of anger and aggression, which is something that's understandable. When you're meeting somebody who's in crisis, it's very understandable for them to be just full of emotions. And some folks express those emotions with deep sadness, and some folks express them with a lot of anger. Kind of comes in with the next beatitude: the blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. And blessed are those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Because sometimes there are folks who are demanding righteousness. They're looking for justice. I frequently am called, even during non-medical emergencies, as a last resort before they call security, just to talk with folks who are really deeply upset. And there's a sedative that we give to people called Ativan. It helps with seizures, but also is kind of a calming medication that will de-escalate someone chemically. So I've been given the nickname Chaplain for similar reasons. And there was one family who stormed out during the code. They had a 7-year-old who had gotten a heart transplant, and they had been on the list for years, and it was just a miracle that she had made it so far. And the doctor, as they're moving the patient, doing compressions, going from the step-down unit to the ICU, said, "Hey, you better talk to the family. They're looking to get kicked out." And so the family had already gone outside to the main circle. I went out and introduced myself, and the family was absolutely not happy to see another person from the hospital come out, and cussed me out for like 15 minutes. But we stayed with it I stayed with them because I knew they were going through a lot. And afterward, it's kind of like riding through the tornado, but God's not in the tornado, the earthquake, but God's not in the earthquake, the fire, but God's not in the fire. And once you ride through all those things, there can be a still small voice. And listen to them. And in their culture, calling kids cute names like spoiled and a stinker was not a thing. Those were bad words that would cause bad outcomes. And so nurses who were caring for this baby saying, "Oh, you're holding her so much, she's going to be spoiled," they thought was a criticism of their parenting. When they were told that the baby was fussing and needed Tylenol, they thought, wow, these nurses just do not want my child to make any noise, so they're just medicating them. And I was able to talk to the nurses and say, was the baby fussy, or why did you give the Tylenol? Was it because the child had an elevated heart rate and that's an indication of pain, and you didn't want the child to be in pain, so you gave them pain medicine? It's like, yeah, exactly, fussy. Like, no, not exactly fussy. So we were able to have a great conversation later about how to talk to this family and how they received support and what was important to them. And I was able to pray with the family about how their child was doing and pray for healing, and to be able to see that they were just looking for justice for their child. And as I listened to mom and dad tell their story, it was very clear that as children, they had experienced injustice, and they had made a bargain with themselves that they would keep their children safe at all costs. And so now this wasn't just fighting for their little girl, it was fighting for themselves. And they felt all alone, abandoned by the hospital. And they said, oh man, even the surgeons don't give us a straight answer. I said, well, here are the 3 questions that you need to ask them, because they won't give you an answer about your child. But you ask them, have you ever seen this before? How common is it? What are you worried about? And how does this procedure usually go? And mom asked those questions while I was next to her, and she said, they answered all my questions. I feel good about this. So learning to be merciful and recognizing the need for folks' righteousness, to me, was very important. And I think that as we go through our own lives, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. If you have a strong ethic, if you know what needs to be done and that's important for you, you will have opportunities to advocate for those things and to, like Gaius, do the work that is needed. There's no shortage of injustice that a love of justice will not be very fulfilling. And it feels very good to be able to say, hey, this family can stay. They're all right. They were going through a hard time. This is what you didn't understand. And I used to get mad at the provider saying, don't you know better? But they're there. They've chosen that work because they want to help. Sometimes they just need to know how to help, because we've all grown up in our own context. So being willing to be curious about something and not reactive is huge, and I think that's what goes into mercy a lot of curiosity. It's not just withholding punishment, but also suspending judgment a little bit. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Working with children, that's just amazing. It's amazing to see and hear the things that children say. And I could say much more about that, but a lot of folks have said a lot about that. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. I think this is certainly virtue. This is a virtue that gets very overlooked for us. This is one of the callings, if we remember what was written in 2 John and 3 John. This is one of those things that makes us Christians a light on the hill and salt to the earth. Salt has a lot of antiseptic and healing properties. If you ever get a mouth wound, a lot of times you're told to swish with salt water because it will heal that divide. And I think being willing to be the person to go in, take mercy into a situation and heal a divide is a tremendous gift and something that is not accessible to all people. I know not all of our chaplains get called to work on reconciling folks with the medical team or working with the medical team to reconcile between one team and another. But that is some of the frequent work that I will get called into because, just like the story I shared just now, it's something that's very important to me, and I think it's something that we're all, as Christians, called to do. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Which goes along with, blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you falsely and say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven. In the same way they prosecuted the prophets who were before you. And I thought a lot about this, and I really am very blessed not to have a huge story about this, except there was one parent who they were an offshoot of one of kind of Judaism. It was a Hebrew Israelite family who were very concerned that I showed up at every code. They're like, man, this guy, this white Christian guy shows up whenever there's a code, whenever there's an emergency. Please do not come back. Like, okay. It wasn't me, I promise. They call me after it happens. So some nurses, like Michael, are very proactive, and they'll see numbers start tanking, and they'll say, hey, you need to be up here. We're going to need you in a minute. So I think there was one time I showed up before the code, and that didn't help with this family. Most of the time it does. So I take the Beatitudes with me. I take the Sermon on the Mount with me pretty much wherever I go. I think it's a great thing to take into the new year. It will serve us well. And it reminds us that there is a reward for the humbler things, for the little things. There's the whole concept of the hero's journey. You learn it in college, English literature, where, and it's deeply embedded in the sort of educational model we follow that came over from Britain, where it's, you go find a dragon, you slay it, then you beat your sword into a plowshare, and then ready for the next time a dragon shows up. Kind of an arc, which is very oversimplistic of it. But I think that Matthew makes an argument for a kind of, for a much different approach, one deeply rooted in meekness and love. And there are deep rewards to that. Seeing folks who are deeply impacted by what we might consider everyday things. Seeing how we change when we know, like, oh, this isn't my responsibility to fix. Comfort doesn't mean totally erasing all the bad stuff. In bringing comfort to families, I absolutely will pray for healing. I do not feel that the family doesn't receive comfort if the patient isn't miraculously healed and comes out of the bed. There was one kid, we had a kiddo come in who was probably 20 years old and had a chronic issue, and she was in the emergency room, was a DNR, and they were getting ready to call time of death, and they said, "Hey, Pastor, would you come up and pray for her?" And part of her condition was that her pulse would drop really low so that people couldn't really read it. But she was still there. She actually wasn't even that sick. Just the ER, she was outside of the parameters of what is normal. And so they said, "Will you come and pray for her?" Mom said, "Oh, I think she's crying." It's like, "I'm going to hold off on that prayer because I didn't bring her back. She never left." But that's not the comfort that each person receives. There's comfort in just sitting with that sadness. And going back to the very first beatitude, which I jumped right over, which is blessed are the poor in spirit. Being poor in spirit, coming with that humility and vulnerability. A lot of times we talk about authenticity, but really what it is vulnerability. Being willing to kind of put down your shields and share who you truly are. Sit with folks like you just arrived after a long trip and catch up with them. Share that sacred time of any sort of darkness, whether it's literal middle of the night darkness, it's a deep sadness after a loss. And that's not easy. It's hard. It's very hard. It's very scary. Because you have to think about what matters to you finally. But having to think about that is hard, but it is its own reward. Many more stories I can tell. We could be here all morning, but I want to end here with the words that Jude ends his, Jude, the brother of James, ends his epistle with. He says, "To him who is able to keep you from stumbling, to present you before his glorious presence without fault, with great joy, to the only God, our Savior, be glory, majesty, power, and authority through Jesus Christ, our Lord, before all ages now and forevermore." It's one of those benedictions or doxologies that I find to nurture and to pull out that idea of being poor in spirit and following God humbly and doing a small thing when a lot of times we are looking for a giant heroic move to make. I loved watching basketball growing up. I loved playing basketball. And there is no winning three-point shot without the 50 other shots that went in, including free throws. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And that is what that life looks like. To follow Jesus, to do those little things that make the tremendous difference. To him who is able to keep you all from stumbling, to be present with you before his glorious presence without fault and with great joy. To the only God our Savior be glory, majesty, power, and authority through Jesus Christ our Lord, before all ages, now and forevermore. Amen.